What happens when most of capable persons in the room are not most influential persons in the room? They may possess the knowledge, solve hardest problems, and consistently deliver results, yet remain overlooked when strategic decisions, promotions, and leadership opportunities are discussed. Capability may earn credibility, but communication determines whether the credibility travels beyond your immediate circle. In today's workshop, it's no longer enough to know the answers. Leaders must articulate the problem, translate it to business, create confidence, and inspire people. During this conversation, we will decode why competent professionals remain invisible despite strong performance, how leaders can translate expertise into strategic influence, why executive presence is not just speaking loudly or performing, how communication must evolve in an AI enabled hybrid and high pressure workplace, and how professionals can use edge framework to communicate, lead, grow, and reinvent. This is especially relevant when people working engagement is weakening. Gallup's 2026 global data reported that only 20% of the employees are engaged, while manager engagement declined from 27% in 2024, 22% in 2025. Gallup's India analysis also points at employees seeking greater clarity, communication, and connection with their managers and organizations. At the same time, the World Economic Forum reports leadership and social influence record 22% of the point increase in importance compared to 2023 findings. Technical competency remains critical, but human-centric leadership skill increasingly determines whether expertise creates organization impact. Before we dive into the topic, let's have a small video on Power of Knowing forum and dive into the topic. Welcome to Preminent Conclave, the weekly podcast series by Power of Mind Forum, where insights become strategic advantage. In our conversation today, why capability alone no longer builds influence, communication does. Let's welcome Dr. Smita Das Jain, Executive Coach, Personal Empowerment Life Coach, ICF Master Coach, creator of the Edge Framework, six-time author and three-time TEDx speaker, to the podcast and dive into the topic. Hi Smita, welcome to our podcast. How are you today? Good evening.
Good evening, Prem. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm doing, and yeah, it's my second time here with you. I came last year. I think, yeah, it's been a year. So glad to have
Yeah,
me. Thank you for having me again here with you.
yeah. I think what we wanted to also say through is, give me a second, Smita. Yeah, there is a small technical issue that I'm facing. Okay. Yeah,
No
through
worries.
the coaching, you have engaged around 2,800 hours with 350 clients, right, and 14 countries. This is a big achievement, and thank you for being here today. Let's dive into our topic and talk about why are high capable professionals increasing finding competence alone not enough to build influence, visibility, or career momentum. Your take on it.
I believe we have entered an interesting phase in the workplace, Prem. Earlier, competence could take you quite far, and today, competence is expected. You are expected to be competent in the role that you are doing. So, in other words, it no longer differentiates you, especially in the middle level and the senior level of your career. And for me personally, I realized this very early on in my own career. In my very first year, I believe in the first 6 months, my manager told me that, Smita, you do all the hard work, but because you don't speak up in meetings, someone else walks away with the credit. And I would say that was a turning point for me. And I was very glad that I got this feedback pretty early in my career to be able to work on it. That was when I realized that work doesn't always speak for itself. People need to speak up for their work. And as I grew up the corporate ladder, that's what I saw time and again. Brilliant people, people with interesting ideas, competent, but they were not speaking up about their work. And years later, today, as an executive coach, I am still seeing the same pattern. Great ideas, strong intent, competent leaders, yet they aren't being heard, remembered, or invited into strategic conversations. And over the last 5 years, since I have been coaching, as you mentioned, across 14 countries in the globe, I have understand that careers rarely stall because of a capability gap. More often, they fall into a capability, leaders fall into a capability trap, and their careers stall because of a communication gap. And in fact, that's really why I wrote this book, which came up last year, Leading with Words, because I wanted leaders to realize that communication isn't something you do after the work. It is part of the work. So, this book was a result of that realization and those conversations I was having with leaders all around the globe.
Wonderful on the books that you have been writing, and it is great to have authors also speak how the books are written and how things are. Why do technical strong leaders sometimes assume that their work should speak for itself, and how does that assumption restrict their growth? Smita, you there? Hello? Smita, can you hear us? I think we have a challenge when Smita is not able to hear us. Hello? I think we lost her. She'll join us back. Yeah, there she joins. Smita, we lost you. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Okay. So,
To the
yes,
next point.
technology does act funny sometimes. You were saying strong leaders, and that's when technology came into play. So, yes, please.
I understand. That's what. So I just want to understand on that point only, because why do technically strong leaders sometimes assume that their work should speak to them itself, and how does that assumption restrict their growth? Your take on it, Smita.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I
yeah, we can hear you. Yes.
Yes, I think there's something. Okay, I do technically leader
We lost her. Yeah.
Okay. So I honestly think this belief starts very early in our lives. Most of us are rewarded for keeping our heads down, working hard, and producing good results. We were taught right since the very formative years of our career that hard work speaks for itself. And to an extent, I would say that's true at the early stage of your career, at the junior levels when you are just starting your career. It's hard work that builds capability. But at a senior level, leadership requires something more. Once you move into leadership, your role is no longer just to produce results. It's to create alignment, influence decisions, and inspire action. And none of that happens silently. Now, many technically strong leaders are also uncomfortable talking about their own contribution because they confuse communicating value with self promotion. And I think that's a very, very important distinction. Communicating your value isn't about saying, look how good I am. It's about helping people understand the impact your work creates. So if your work saved the organization money, say that. If your idea reduced risk, explain how. If your team delivered an outcome, tell the story behind the outcome. That's not self promotion, that's leadership communication. Your work earns you credibility, your communication earns you opportunity, and the technically sound leaders need to understand this.
Got it. Now, taking that point, how can professionals communicate their value without appearing self promotional, politically motivated, or inauthentic?
I believe the first step is to redefining what communicating your value actually means. So most professionals thinks they have only two choices.
Hmm.
Either you can stay quiet and hope people notice, or talk about yourself and risk sounding self promotional.
Okay.
But there's a third way. Instead of talking about yourself, talk about the value your work created. I also mentioned some examples in the previous answer that I was speaking with you. So, talk about the problem you solved, the
Hmm.
decision you enabled, the customer you helped, and
Okay.
the impact you created. The spotlight then shifts from you to the outcome.
Hmm.
And that's authentic. That's leadership. In fact, one of the chapters that I wrote in this book that I was mentioning about is about communicating your achievements without sounding arrogant. That's actually a very important chapter in the book because that this is something I see so many professionals struggles with. So that was my intention. As leaders, we need to know how to influence without authority, communicate in meetings and presentation, navigate difficult conversations. It is ultimately how you navigate the conversations that will shape your career. Your expertise creates value, and your communication determines whether anyone sees, trusts, or acts on that.
Very important what you are saying, Smita, is that we also look at capability, what a profession can accomplish, right? That's the first point that we should look at. Now, when you talk about credibility, whether others trust their judgment, that's the next point that
Yes.
we should look at. When you look at visibility, whether the right stakeholders recognize their contribution,
Hmm.
right? And when you say influence, whether their communication changes decisions or behaviors, right? So that is, I think, that's the way that you should look at communicating, getting things very clearly to the levels of capability, credibility, visibility, and the influence part, right? Similarly, a technology architect may design a strong solution but lose organizational support because the proposal does not explain the cost,
Hmm.
right? And it adoption barriers and the commercial impact or the implementation probability, that could be one of the challenges where a technical guy will not look at the number side.
Hmm.
I'm being a technical guy, I also had the same problem. I used to go and get the implementation done, but when you look at the cost, I had difficulties. But when I moved from a project manager role to a program manager level role, I wanted to look at the overall picture of this project or this program. how much is that program costing, what is that we costed, what is the resources that are there, how much have we spent, and the duration is apt or not. So I think that's the important point, that you always look at, you should look at stakeholder sponsorship, limited partition in strategic meeting. These are the things that are pointers that you should explain, is what I understand, right? And
Yes.
what you also say, your expertise creates value. Your communication determines whether anyone sees you, trusts you,
Absolutely.
or acts on it, right? That's the
Yes.
point that we want to emphasize. How can leaders translate deep expertise into communication that different stakeholders can understand, trust, and act upon?
The biggest shift is to stop starting with your knowledge and start
Mm.
with the listener's need. Experts often communicate from inside out. You also gave the example from your career, like you used to do the technical stuff and then you used to get into so much detail, right? So
Yeah.
that's the mistake most experts do, at least when they are starting their career or they transition from an expertise role to a leadership role. They began with everything they know, but effective leaders communicate from the outside in. So instead of inside out, we have to learn to communicate from the outside in. Effective leaders, effective communicators ask, what does this person need to understand? Why should it matter to them? What decision do I need from them? And that is where expertise becomes influence. The content may remain the same, but the framing must change.
Yeah.
A board member may need to understand risk and business impact. A customer may need confidence and reassurance. And a technical team may need precision and dependencies. So, the real scale here is not merely simplifying expertise, it is translating it into relevance. And as experts, we need to remember that influence begins when our expertise becomes meaningful in someone else's language.
Got it. Now, how should the idea be communicated different to a board member, a technical team, investor, or an employee?
The message should remain consistent here, but the lens must change.
Okay.
So, a board member wants to know the strategic implication, the risk,
Hmm.
and the decision required. A customer wants to know what it means for them and whether they can trust you. A technical team needs depth and clarity on execution, while an investor would want commercial impact, scale, and return. While the same message that at the same time the employee may want is context, direction, and reassurance. So, in every case, the content is the same, but what every stakeholder is looking for it is different. But the mistake leaders make is that they have this one master presentation deck and they keep on repeating the same presentation to every audience. Now, good communication is not about changing the truth. So that doesn't mean like you keep on changing the presentation deck because you have a different audience. But it is about changing the emphasis. Remember, outside in. So, who is the other party? What does he or she want? What is most relevant for them? So, the question I would ask before any important conversation is, what matters most to my listener? And how do I connect my message to that? That's very important.
Got it. Now, coming to that point itself, what communication structure can help leaders move from sharing information to creating clarity, relevance, and action? Because we just spoke about how different people we are supposed to talk. Now, how does the structure help here?
Yes. So, though there are some specific structures in different occasion, as in a structure in a negotiation will differ from a structure of a feedback conversation.
Hmm.
But in general, if I were to look at it, I use a very simple structure. First, what is happening?
Hmm.
Second, why does it matter? And when I say why does it matter, it's not why does it matter to me, it's why does it matter to my listener. Then, third, what happens if we do nothing about it? Fourth, what do we need to decide or do next? And finally, what outcome will that action create? So this 5-step structure: what, why, what happens, what do we need, and what outcome will that action create? Now, most leaders stop after only the first question, which is what is happening. So, as a result, they are only sharing information. But information alone does not create movement. The clarity comes from context, relevance comes from consequence, and action comes from a clear ask. That is why I often tell leaders, do not end with data, end with direction. And the purpose of leadership communication is not merely to ensure people know more. It is to help them decide and act better. If you are talking to me, I should be knowing what am I expected to do. That is very important.
Now, taking that as a cue, now how can leaders simplify complex ideas without oversimplifying risks, dependencies, strategic consequences? Because when you have a problem, you are able to solve it, but do we really look at these 3 pointers like risk, dependency, or strategic?
See, I think if we shift the focus from ourselves to the other party, it's really not that difficult. Now, simplification in communication does not mean removing complexity. That's execution. In execution, of course, if there's a challenge, if there's a crisis, you need to take action to solve it. But when you are talking about simplification in communication, it means organizing the complexity and not removing complexity from your conversation. So, a leader should preserve the important nuance but present it in layers. So, start with the headline: what is the matter, as I mentioned. Then explain, like maybe you have a long list of matters that is happening. So for example, if you're putting across a list of challenge in a project that is happening, maybe there are tens of challenges you are facing, but start or explain the 2 3 most critical factors that matter most, because not everybody needs to do the details. Now after you have put forth what matters most, bring in the risks, dependencies, and detail for those who need it. So, what creates confusion is not complexity itself, it is unstructured complexity. And this is what I discuss repeatedly in my book, Leading with Words, and repeatedly with the coaches who I work with, that clarity does not come from saying less for the sake of it. It comes from helping people see the hierarchy of information. So,
Yeah.
what must they know first? What must they understand next? What detail can follow later? Strong communicators do not give everything at one go. So, they do not dilute complexity, but they give it shape.
What I am trying to get from your point is strong communication begins with the audience decision, not just speaker's knowledge, right? So as a useful structure, what we can look at is what is happening, which you rightly said, and what does it matter to this stakeholder or the overall stakeholders, right? And what happens if no action is taken, what could be their consequences, right? And what decision or commitment is required, because when you decide something and you are putting a structure to it and you are also taking an action to that, and when you take action, what is that commitment that you are giving, whether this will be completed, how is the measured outcome coming to be, and what is the outcome that this action is going to create, right? So from a, if you really look at from a CISO or the CIO role, we always talk about what is the critical vulnerabilities we have in a program, right? But what should the CISO communicate? Unresolved exposures affect systems supporting 40%. That could be one way of saying it. Our customer transactions, we require prioritized redemption decision to reduce the service, regulatory, and reputational risks. I think that is one thing. And we also should say what is the risks that will come, and there could be possible fines as well, right?
Yes.
That could be one of the challenge that we see. Technical facts remain intact, but the message now supporting executive decision is what has to be discussed and clearly articulated, right? That is what I think is the way you should communicate. Influence begins when your expertise becomes meaningful in someone else's language, right? Am I right in saying that, Smita? Smita, there? I think we still have some technical challenge from Smita's side. We'll wait for. We lost. Smita, can you hear us? Hello.
Some lag that again. Audible to you, Prem.
Some lag. Yes,
Can
you
you
are
hear
audible. Your
me?
screen is getting freeze. Yes, I can hear you now. Smita, I think drop off and rejoin, right? I think there is some.
Yes, but I can hear you.
No, there is some issue there, Smita. I think. We have some technical glitches happening from the internet side. I think the speaker's internet is fluctuating. So we will wait for her to join back. Meanwhile, while we are on this, see, what we should look at, the latest trend is Microsoft in 2026 Work Trend Index argues that AI systems assume more executional activities. Leaders must re-architect work, define human and agent responsibilities to help employees understand the opportunity and the implications. Research involves about 20,000 AI using knowledge workers across 10 markets, and highly continuing employees' anxiety about their jobs displacement is rapidly changing the skills. That's the point that we are seeing when we look at AI coming in as a picture. I think we have Smita joining back. I will come back. I think there was a challenge on your internet again. So going to the next question.
Here.
You're able to hear us?
Yes.
Yeah. So what does authentic executive presence look like when leaders can command? Yeah, I can hear you. You're able to hear us?
No, Prem, not able.
Can you join from your mobile if that is possible? Can you hear us now?
Yes, I can, Prem.
So what I was asking is, what does authentic executive presence look like, and how can leaders
I can
command?
hear you.
I think there is still a lag there, Smita. We are not able to hear you.
There's a lag, Prem, so you suggested.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, just hold on. Yes. So
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Am I audible to you
Am
now?
I audible to you
Clear
now?
now.
Okay.
Okay. Let's take the question again. What
Okay.
does authentic leader executive presence look like, and how can leaders command attention without becoming louder and more theoretical and less genuine?
So, I do believe that executive presence is one of the most misunderstood concepts in leadership. So, many people assume that it's about having a commanding voice, being the smartest person in the room, or having natural charisma. I don't believe any of these define executive presence. To me, executive presence is the ability to create confidence in others. So when you speak, people need to feel clearer. When things are uncertain, people feel calmer. And when decisions are difficult, people trust your judgment. That's executive presence. It's not about drawing attention to yourself, it's about bringing clarity to everyone around you. And in fact, that's one of my favorite lines from my book, Leading with Words. And since you asked this presence, if you could just give me 2 seconds, let me just read because, we are talking about executive presence.
Yeah.
So I'm just reading from the book, okay, what I have written. So executive presence is a term easy to recognize but hard to define. Imagine it as a blend of charisma, confidence, and authenticity. It's about exuding a sense of gravitas and credibility that commands respect and inspires trust. But more than that, it's about consistency. Being the same leader, whether addressing your team, presenting to senior management, or engaging with clients. Executive presence is about owning your space, both literally and figuratively. It's about how you carry yourself, articulate your ideas and in settings and everyday interactions, and navigate challenging situations with grace and composure. This intangible quality that sets exceptional leaders apart from the rest.
Good one about that. I think now taking that point is what separate executive presence from confidence, charisma, seniority, and influence or fluency.
So I would say confidence, all of these things that you mentioned, these are just ingredients.
Mm.
Executive presence is the outcome. So I have met confident people, and some of them are leaders who their people didn't trust. It is not because of the lack of expertise, it's because of how they made the other persons feel. Now, I have also met quiet leaders who hardly speak, yet, whenever they do, the room listens. And why so? Because presence gets built over a period of time. So, people know your words are thoughtful, they know that you listen, they know that you don't react impulsively, and they know that your actions consistently match what you say. So, this thing that we call as executive presence, it's not about something you project, it is about what other people experience around you.
Now, there is always a pointer that they will look, right? Composure, listening, and stuff like that. How do you compose, listen, question, and emotionally regulate influence that way leader is perceived?
So the things that you mentioned, these are actually the invisible signs of leadership. So more than what leaders are saying, people will notice how the leader is saying it. So the content is, of course, important, but the way you put across the content, in some cases, that becomes even more important. So, see, when times are good, everybody will speak in a calm and composed manner.
Yeah.
But are you a leader who can stay composed when times are challenging?
Hmm.
Are you a leader who can genuinely listen when there's a rebuttal? Now, will you genuinely listen when somebody questions your ideas? And when you are troubled, can you regulate your emotions instead of transferring those negative emotions to your team? It is these moments, okay? It is these moments when you are under pressure that builds trust. Just before this conversation with you, I was in a coaching conversation with one of my coaches, and we discussed this subject of trust, that how do we create trust in relationships. And that was the point that I was discussing with her, that more than your eloquence, it is your composure that creates executive presence. So people don't remember the loudest person in the room. They remember the person who brought clarity when everyone else brought noise.
Yes, agreed. Can executive presence be continuously developed, or it must emerge naturally from personality and experience?
It definitely can be developed. If it were, honestly, if it were pure personality, I would not be sitting here talking with you today. Because by personality, I am an introvert. There was a time when I believed that executive presence belonged to people who were outspoken, who were easygoing, who can talk about everything under the sun. Now, of course, with age and experience, I'm wiser. I know that it's simply not true. Executive presence is a series of habits. It's learning to pause before responding, it's structuring your thoughts, it's listening deeply, and it's choosing your words intentionally. And
Yeah.
none of these are personality traits. I mean, some of these may be, but over a period of time, they become practice. These are all practices.
Mm.
And that's actually one of the most important things about leadership. You really don't have to become someone else. You simply have to become a more intentional version of yourself. And talking about the situation just that happened here. So we are in the middle of a podcast. Something happened in technology. I couldn't hear you. I disconnected. Yet we are here again, continuing this conversation calmly with a smile, on the spot thinking about some roundabouts. I would say both of us have demonstrated what executive presence is all about here.
Thank you for that, Smita. I think we've been seeing situations like this, and we understand how to cope up is what we are trying to see, right? I think what we are also saying is executive presence should not reduce to appearance, vocabulary, or speaking style, right? It can be understood through 5 observable behaviors, which is clarity, conviction, composure, connection, and consistency, right? So when we talk about clarity, we talk about the leader communicating the essential message without unnecessary complexity, right? That's the first point. Now when we talk about conviction, the leader should own the recommendations while remaining open for evidence, right? When you talk about composure, the leader remains thoughtful under pressure also. I will take one example here. Is this one boss which I worked with, right? And he's been one of my mentors as well. So we had a situation, and we were in a different place, but the servers were in a different place. So we were at a customer place. The servers were in the data center. What happened is there was a technology issue that faced, and we were sitting in the customer place, and everybody were running. Server is not working and everything. Suddenly my boss asked me, server किधर है? I said, server data center में. हम यहाँ क्या कर रहे? In that pressurous moment also, he said, why are we sitting in the customer where the server is having a problem? We should be there to solve the problem, rather than sitting here and looking at what customer is saying. If you have to solve the problem, you should be present where exactly the issue is, right? And you still need to manage things and move on. Then what connection that the leader, he understood that the concern and motivational of others can be done only if you sit in the data center where the people are firefighting, right? And then we went in there and we spoke things, or what happened, was there a power failure? We tried to understand what exactly happened, and then we were able to look at the words, decisions, action reinforcement to one another. You do this, this is what is to be looked at. that priority, and we were able to solve the issue very quickly, right?
Hmm.
Whereas if we had sat at the customer's location and the server is somewhere else, we would have called people and they would have been panicked, and we also would have got panicked saying that what exactly is happening. I think when you look at considering the high stake leadership, meeting whether the project has failed or it is success is all about how do you communicate. That's what I feel. Smita, what do you feel about these pointers?
No, I absolutely agree with you, Prem. As I mentioned earlier, adverse situations will keep on happening, and sometimes the other party may act or behave in a manner which may put us in a tricky situation or a spot of bother, and that is an understatement, as we know very well when we think about our workplace. We can't control the other party.
Mhm.
What we can control is how we react to them. And in fact, that's the thing. I would say it's always good that we respond instead of react. Respond is taking a moment to collect ourselves before um, acting on the step that is being proposed. If we react, we will always appear unstructured. If we respond, the clarity part of the communication automatically fits into place.
What we are also trying to communicate today here is executive presence is not about entering a room with all the answers, right? I know this, I can solve this, I can do all this. But while you enter the room, it is helping the room to find that clarity, what has to be done is what I think is very important. Now, how must leadership communication evolve when professionally working across hybrid teams, digital platforms, and increasingly AI enabled organizations?
So, leadership today has to, or rather, we are talking about leadership communications. I would add to that leadership communication has to become more intentional and not just more frequent. So, today, people are already surrounded by so many messages, so much meetings, dashboards, and now there is this flood of AI generated content as well. I think in a generation prior to us, the problem was lack of information. To the situation, the question in front of leaders was where do I get information from? Today, the problem is not lack of information, it's about lack of priority, context, and meaning. And a leader's role now is therefore not simply to communicate more, it is to help people understand what matters and why it matters. So, AI can always help you to draft, summarize, and adapt messages, but leaders must still provide judgment, empathy, and direction. So, in an AI enabled workplace, information can be automated, but meaning, trust, and accountability cannot. Technology can always scale communication, but it still cannot replace, it cannot scale leadership responsibility. That needs to come from you as a leader. And this is where your communication plays a part.
Got it. So, how can leaders prevent communication overload when employees are surrounded by meetings, messages, dashboards, emails, and AI generated content?
The first thing is that leaders need to stop treating every piece of information, every piece of content out there as urgent.
Hmm.
Nothing, no two pieces of information are equally urgent. And, information which is urgent most often is not important. So before sending a message, ask, what does this person need to know?
Yeah.
What do they need to do about it and by when? So what do they need to know, what is the timeline, and then if we just stick to that, there will be no overload. I think many messages create overload because they contain a lot of information without a clear decision or owner. So I often tell it to the leaders I coach, do not make people search for point, state the priority, state the context, clarify the action. So I would say we are speaking about communication overload here.
Yeah.
We essentially, the answer to that is not necessarily fewer messages. It is basically having fewer instances for people you are communicating with to wonder what the message is all about.
Now, sometimes the message becomes personal, right? What should leaders communicate personally rather than deleting or delegating to presentations, intercommunicational teams, or AI tools?
Anything, any sort of information or decision that carries emotional weight, that has ethical responsibility or consequences, should come from the leader. So that includes difficult decision, situations like restructuring or retrenching, uncertainty, accountability after failure, and even recognitions and appreciation. So both the difficult conversation and also the some of the most appreciation news or information that you have to communicate, that needs to come from the leader. So presentation can share facts.
Yeah.
An internal communication team can improve the wording, and AI can help you structure your message. But none of these can take ownership on your behalf. You are the leader. Whatever comes to from your pen or your mouth, you have to take responsibility for that. So people need to see the person behind the decision, especially when that decision affects their trust, identity, or future. As I always tell to my coaches that AI, you can outsource the messaging, drafting the messaging part to an AI, but you can't outsource the meaning. The meaning has to come from you.
With that point, how can leaders use AI to improve communication without losing originality, empathy, judgment, and authenticity?
I think partly I answered it with the previous question, Prem, that the meaning, okay, the consequence, the intent, it is you. AI is a tool. Of course, it can help you to organize your thoughts. It can help you to simplify language. It can help you to adapt the message for different audiences. It can also, you can brainstorm it with it. It can also help you to rehearse different responses. But you can't rely completely on AI. As a leader, you must ask, okay, does this sound like me? Does it reflect what I genuinely believe? Have I considered how this will affect the person receiving it? Now, authenticity does not mean writing every word alone, but it does mean taking responsibility for every word that you put out there, either by speaking or writing. Now, my simple rule will always be, okay, what is your judgment here? What is your decision here? What is the content that you want to communicate here? If you have clarity, AI can help you structure that better, but that clarity needs to come from you. No AI can replace the human judgment.
Okay. With this, I think we are on top of the hour, where I have two questions which have come from the audience. I am bringing them more to the screen
Sure.
for us to have that discussed. Give me a second, please. Yeah, I am bringing the first question. It says, what's most frequent prevents a capable professional from speaking with influence?
I would say first, there is this lack of confidence, which usually comes from fear of judgment. So, every leader that I have met who has this diffidence in speaking up, it is coming from certain limiting beliefs that they have. That, okay, my English is not good, that can be one limiting belief, or I don't know the subject as well as the other person, that's another limiting belief. So all these, or all eyes are on me, people are judging me by every word I say, That's the third limiting belief. So all of these, we are just too much into our own head, and that prevents us from speaking up. Once we let go of these limiting beliefs, and once we know the right structure, which is something that we discussed earlier in the conversation, then influence is a natural byproduct of confidence.
Got it. I'll bring up the second question that has come up. Which of these barriers is most difficult to recognize, and which can be changed fast?
Which of these barriers? I can't see the barriers.
Let me read it out for you. Just a second.
Yes.
One is fear of judgment,
Mhm.
okay? Overthinking and exercising preparation, inability to simplify complex ideas, belief that good work should automatically be recognized.
All of these are barriers, I would say. And in fact, fear of judgment is something I spoke about in my last answer. But if I were to pick one, it is this belief that our work should speak for itself.
Okay.
No, and I think we discussed it in the early part of our conversation also, that people think that it's self promotion if we are talking about our work.
Right.
But the fact is, if I don't say that I'm an executive coach, I help leaders to speak with confidence and lead with impact, how will you know that what I bring to the table? So that is the thing. Work is a non-living entity. We are the ones living. We have to speak about our work.
Got it. With this, I have some takeaways from the session that we have done so far. I've taken a note of that, and I'm going to read them out. Capability creates potential, not automatic influence, right? That's the first point. Expertise is essential, but organizations act only when expertise is transferred into relevance, confidence, and clear communications. Now, coming to the visibility and influence are different, right? Visibility makes people aware of you. Influence makes people trust you. Judgment and act on your recommendations. That's the second takeaway that I have. Coming to the executive presence and behavior part, it is demonstration through clarity, conviction, composure, connection, and consistency, not volume, vocabulary, or personality type. The fourth point that we wanted to emphasize is communication must produce movement, right? Effective leadership communication reduces confusion, accelerates decisions, establishes ownership, and creates accountability. The fifth point that I would like to say is AI increases the value of human communication. As AI generates more information and performs more execution, leaders become increasingly responsible for meaning, judgment, trust, and accountability. The last point that I have noted, authenticity does not mean remaining unstructured. Leaders can prepare, practice, improve their communication while remaining authentic. These are the pointers that I have taken over this one 45-50 minutes that we had our discussion today, Smita. Any pointers that you want to mention before we close the session?
So I would just want to add, Prem, that, and this is, call it advice, call it a suggestion, call it a recommendation. But I would strongly say to all those who are watching us today and those who will watch the replay, is don't mistake a communication gap for a capability gap. You can contribute. You have more to contribute. Don't wait for someone out there to discover you. Find your voice, express your value, and let your communication reflect your capability. And again, I would like to mention that's why I wrote Leading with Words. My hope is that it helps more professionals and leaders communicate with clarity, confidence, and influence so their ideas receive the attention they truly deserve. See, the world, you already are talented. The world doesn't just need your talent, it also needs to know that you have the talent, what the talent is, and how it can create that impact. So use your voice to create the impact in the world that the world deserves from you.
Got it, Smita. Thank you for making this session very practically looking at understanding why communication is not a necessary to the leaders. It is one of the primary mechanisms through which leadership becomes visible and influential. And with this, we are on top of the hour. And thank you for joining us today. Smita, thank you for joining us, and the audience also thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, Prem. Thank you.
Thank you.